Hello students, welcome to the new session of the now muscle physiology, and now in this lecture we will see in details the steps in the contraction of the muscle. So before we go for it, what you have to understand is the power stroke and how the affinity of the myosin head will change with the active site. As I have told you, this is the Z line, this is the sarcomere, one sarcomere, and these are the myosin heads. This is the myosin filament, and these are the myosin heads which are propping up. This is the actin filament, and what lies over the actin filament is the active sites, which are normally covered by the tropomyosin. So once the calcium enters, the tropomyosin will be dragged away and the active sites will be exposed. And then once these active sites are exposed, the myosin head is already having the ADP and phosphate. So myosin head has got the ATP binding site, as well as it has the ATPase activity. So once the ATP binds with that, it will immediately break down into ADP and phosphate. And now this combination of the myosin head plus ADP plus phosphate, it has got the high affinity for the active site. So it is just waiting for the chance. Whenever the active site is open, it will immediately attack and it will bind with it. So once this myosin head binds with the active site, now there occurs the bending, which is called as the power stroke. Where does the bending take place? The bending will take place between the tail and the arm. So that is at one position the bending will take place, and the next bending will take place at the between the arm and the head. So because of this bending, now the actin filaments, they will be drawn medially, and since energy is required for that, so the phosphate one will be used up and ADP and phosphate will be released. Once this ADP and phosphates are released, now the ATP binding site is free. So once this ATP binding site is free, new ATP will combine with the myosin head. So new ATP from the cytoplasm will come and bind with the myosin head. Now this combination of a myosin head with the ATP does not have affinity for the myosin active site. So the combination of the myosin head and the ATP does not have affinity for the active site. So what will happen now? This is called as a spring action. So immediately because of the spring action, the myosin head will get detached and it will come back to its original position. So it will come back to its original position. Now what will happen in between that time? The ATP will be again broken down into ADP and phosphate. So again the affinity for the myosin head to the active site will develop. But now to cause the binding, now the next active site will be available. So again the myosin head will bind with the next active site. Again the bending will take place. Binding of the myosin head with the active sites will cause bending or the power stroke. Again the actin filament will be drawn inward and this cycle will go on continuously. These are called as the power strokes. This type of contraction is called as walk along theory of the muscle contraction. The myosin head is just walking along the actin filament. If you understood this much, we can go into the details of the steps of the muscle contraction. Just look at this figure. How does the affinity of the myosin head changes with the active site? So this is the combination of ATP and myosin, which does not have the affinity for the active site. So ATP will be broken down into ADP and phosphate, and because of that, now this combination ADP, phosphate and the myosin will have the affinity for the active site. So immediately it will combine with the actin filament, that is at the active site. And now what will happen because of that? The actin, myosin, ADP and phosphate combination is there. Power stroke will take place, and now the ADP and phosphate will be released because the energy will be used up. Once this is released, the ATP binding site is free now. Because of that, the new ATP will bind. But binding of new ATP will cause what? It will decrease the affinity for the active site. And what will happen because of that? The actin molecule, that is the myosin head, will get detached from the active sites. And ultimately again, the new ATP myosin combination is there. ATP will be again broken down into ADP and phosphate, and the cycle will go on continuously. So if we want to go into the details of the contraction of the muscle now, we will start from the step number 1. What is step number 1? The transmission, neuromuscular transmission. What it will generate? The end plate potential. If the end plate potential is strong enough, it will generate the action potential into the sarcolemma. This action potential now will spread rapidly and it will go through the T tubule and it will reach up till the triad. So because of that, what will happen now? There is release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, that is from the terminal cisternae. This calcium will go and bind with the troponin C. Now once this calcium binds with the troponin C, what will happen? Troponin C will drag away, or the troponin will drag away the tropomyosin from the groove of the actin filament. So because of that, what will happen now? The active sites will be exposed. Once these active sites are exposed, the myosin head is having that combination, myosin head, ADP and phosphate. So immediately myosin head will combine with the active site. Because of that, what will happen now? The power stroke will take place. So the bending will take place, the actin filaments will be drawn medially, and ultimately what will happen? The phosphate bond will be used up and the ADP will be released in the cytoplasm. Because of that, what will happen now? The ATP binding site is free. So another ATP molecule will combine with the myosin head. But now this myosin head and ATP will not have affinity for the active site. So by the spring action, the myosin head will detach now, and now in the meantime what will happen? It will come back to its original position, but now it is near to the next active site. The meantime ATP will be broken down into ADP and phosphate again, and again the affinity will develop. This will continue up till the calcium level in the cytoplasm it maintain constant. What is most important thing? The calcium level should be maintained at a constant high level. If the calcium level is low, what will happen? Tropomyosin will again cover up the groove and the active sites will be covered up. And because of that, the myosin head will not have any active sites to bind up. So this depletion of the calcium level is very essential to cause relaxation of the muscle. So now the next question is that how the muscle relaxes. Whenever the action potential is reaching to the triad and it is causing release of the calcium, and when the calcium are released into the cytoplasm, at the same time there is one more pump which is coming into action. That pump is present over the membrane of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. What is that pump? It is calcium magnesium ATPase pump. What is that function of the pump? As soon as the calcium enters into the cytoplasm, its function is to take the calcium from the cytoplasm, put it back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum in exchange of the magnesium. This pump will act against the concentration gradient. It will use energy, ATP, to make sure that the calcium stores are created into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So once the action potential reaches, once the muscle contraction has started, at the same time the process of relaxation has also started. I mean to say that the calcium level will again be slowly decreasing, and once that calcium level comes below a critical value, then the active sites will be covered up and muscle will be relaxed. So what you understood by that? The muscle relaxation is also an active process. That means what? It requires ATP. ATP is also required to cause the detachment. Unless and until the new ATP molecule combines with the myosin head, the actomyosin complex will not detach. So ATP will also be required for this. So the muscle relaxation as such is an active process. That means it will require energy. Clinical picture related to that is the rigor mortis. You might have heard about the rigor mortis. What is rigor mortis? It is the stiffness which occurs after the death. Why that stiffness occurs? For that you have to understand this the process of contraction and relaxation. Whenever the person is living, the person is having particular posture, and this posture is because of the partial contraction of some muscles. Your muscles are not totally relaxed. If you look at your limb now, it is different that from the limb of a paralyzed person. The limb of the paralyzed person will be totally hanging down. But the limb of when you are having a particular posture, that means that your muscles are in particular state of contraction. And now if the person dies, when your muscles were in a particular state of contraction, partial state of contraction, that means there was some calcium in the cytoplasm. There was partial contraction, actomyosin complexes were being formed. And if the person dies now suddenly, what will happen? The ATP production will stop. So if the ATP production will stop, will there be any ATP to take the calcium from the cytoplasm and put it into the sarcoplasmic reticulum? No, there will not be any ATP. Will there be any ATP to cause detachment of this actomyosin complexes? No. So the ectomyosin complexes will remain as attached. Calcium level in the cytoplasm will not be decreased. So in that case, the muscle will remain in a partial state of contraction. This is nothing but the rigor mortis. Some related other properties related to the muscle. Isotonic and isometric contraction. Iso means what? Same. Isotonic contraction, where the tension will remain same but the muscle length can change. A classical example I can give is that you are lifting a small weight, you are taking it in the hand and you are lifting it up. You are successful in lifting up that. So in that case, the biceps muscle is contracting, the length is decreasing, but the tension will be approximately same as that related to the weight of the object which you are lifting up. So this is called as isotonic contraction. Isometric contraction, you are trying to lift a 100 kg load. So you are not able to lift it up. So in that case, what your biceps will do? Your biceps will try to produce more and more tension. But actually there is no lifting up. So there is no shortening of the muscle. So there is no change in the length of the muscle. So in that case, what it will be called as? Isometric contraction. So in isometric contraction, the tension will go on increasing, but the length will remain same. Motor unit. Now what is motor unit? It is a single axon supplying the nerve fibers. Physiologically, it is very important so that we can have the gradation of muscle contraction. Now how it is possible? Suppose a muscle is having 3 motor units. Actually, the number is much more. This is just for the example. Suppose a muscle is having 3 motor units. And now if the body wants to contract only 33%, so what the body will do? The body will only cause stimulation of the 1 motor unit. If the body wants to have the contraction up till 66%, the body will excite 2 motor units. If the body wants full contraction, then the body will excite all the 3 motor units. So by having the motor units, we can have the gradation of contraction. Motor units are also useful for the change of the muscle can work for a long time. Suppose there are motor units at the back muscle, and if I am standing here for a very long time, my back muscle will get fatigued if all the muscle fibers they are acting together. So what in my back, what will happen? Some motor units will contract, but some motor units will be in the relaxed state. Now whenever these muscle fibers which are in the state of contraction, they get fatigued, now slowly they will relax. At the same time, this motor unit will contract. Even without my knowledge and without changing the length of the muscle as whole, this motor unit will exchange their work, so that the muscle can contract for a longer time without getting fatigue. So this is the importance of the motor unit. Motor unit, a smaller motor unit is very helpful to cause fine movements. The movement of the thumb as such, they are very fine. So these are the ones which are very useful. Whereas the back muscle will have the large motor units because the fine movements are not required there. Next, the Frank-Starling's law. What is Frank-Starling's law? If there is an increase in the initial length of the muscle fiber within the physiological limit, there is an increase in force of contraction. Remember, this happens only within the physiological limit. So what do you mean by initial length? The initial length is the one where the muscle has, before the muscle contraction has started. So in this case, what will happen? If I stretch the muscle before I stimulate it, what will happen? There is a more number of ectomyosin complexes that can be formed. That is the molecular basis of the Frank-Starling's law. And because of that, the muscle will contract more forcefully. Next is muscle atrophy and hypertrophy. This you might all have experienced that if a muscle is not used, it undergoes atrophy. Remember that the number of myofibrils that will decrease. The number of muscle fibers, they will not decrease or increase. What is going to decrease? The protein content in the muscle. That means what? The actin, myosin filaments, that means the myofibrils that are going to decrease. Opposite will happen in case of hypertrophy. Excess use of muscle, ultimately it is going to cause the hypertrophy, mainly because of the increase in the actin and myosin filament. Next, your day-to-day contractions of the skeletal muscles are partially tetanic or fully tetanic type. Now what do you mean by tetanic type? Tetanic type means what? What is definition of tetanus? Smooth and sustained state of contraction. So what will happen in the body? Actually, a frequency of the impulses are being sent. Because of that, what will happen? The muscle will start contracting, and before it relaxes, there is a next action potential. So because of that, what will happen? The calcium level can be maintained higher. The summation effect will occur and the muscle will go in a sustained state of contraction. This smooth sustained state of contraction is very, very important for the skeletal muscle. And your day-to-day activity are either partially tetanic or the tetanic type. When it comes to the energetics of the muscle, from where it gets the energy. So as you can see in this chart now, the major first source is the ATP. ATP is broken down into ADP and the energy is being released. Next source which can replenish this ATP is phosphocreatine. So phosphocreatine can combine with ADP and generate the ATP. Another source, next source will be the glucose or glycogen. This can replenish phosphocreatine as well as ATP. As you can see here, if there is anaerobic metabolism, lactic acid is generated and the number of ATP synthesized they are less in case where there is a lack of oxygen. But if in presence of oxygen now, the number of ATPs that will be synthesized, that will be more. If the glucogen, if there is a hydrolysis of glucogen or glycose. But remember, this glucose, glycogen, they remain important source of energy when the muscle is doing exercise. But at the rest, the main source of energy for the muscle is free fatty acids. So free fatty acids, with the help of oxygen, they can be converted into ATP. The concept of oxygen depth. Whenever you do sudden exercise, what will happen? Some anaerobic metabolism will take place. Lactic acid that will be formed. And to wash away this lactic acid, there is a concept that is called as oxygen depth that is created. So therefore, you hyperventilate, the blood pressure will remain higher for some time after you stop doing exercise, is to mainly to clear this oxygen depth. And you might be knowing about the importance of a glycogen rich diet for the athletes before they go for their event. So because this is, now you can see here that the glycogen stores are, if there are more energy that can be given to the muscle. Now about the fast and slow muscle fibers. As you can see in this table, the fast muscle fibers are also called as type 2 muscle fibers, and the slow muscle fibers, they are also called as type 1 muscle fibers. Fast muscle fibers, they are having mainly the glycolytic activity. They can go for the anaerobic metabolism very fast, they can break down the glycogen, they can generate the ATP fast, but they will not be having the oxidative metabolism. They will be the oxidative metabolism will be mainly there in the slow muscle fibers. So the fast muscle fibers are also called as fast or glycolytic or white muscle fibers, because they will be having less amount of the myoglobin as such. But the amount of myoglobin will be more in the slow muscle fibers, so they are also called as the red muscle fiber. So as you can see here, the differences between the fast and the slow muscle fiber, the glycolytic capacity will be high in the fast muscle fiber. Oxidative capacity will be high in the slow muscle fibers. Myosin ATPase activity, since the fast muscle will have to contract, the power stroke should be faster one to cause faster contraction of the muscle. So therefore the myosin ATPase activity will be more faster in the fast muscle fibers. Sarcoplasmic reticulum calcium pumping capacity, naturally it will be more high in the fast muscle fibers. Diameter will be large for the fast muscle fibers. Which are the example of the fast muscle fiber? The extraocular muscles, which will cause the fast movement of the eyeballs. Then the muscles around the thumb. Which are the examples of the slow muscle fibers? The back muscle or the posture maintaining muscles. These are the examples for the, which mainly, these muscles mainly contain large amount of the slow muscle fibers. But the in the muscle, there is a combination of the fast muscle fiber and the slow muscle fiber. But depending upon the function of the muscle as a whole, the percentage will be different. So with this, we come to the end of this lecture. Thank you.